All right, we are now being live streamed.
Okay. This thing, even though I can't read the comments because my freaking eyes suck now.
Probably go to the eye doctors about that.
I have to. Well, I get messages to go to the appointment all the time. And I have to do it, and that's my problem. And I never do because I'm fucking whatever. But anyway,
We're live right now. People are
no, no,
talking
that's
about
great. Lucky them. All right.
this is annoying because I can't. I'm trying to get in to see the comments.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, but I do have to make plans to go do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So back on Saturday morning again for us. We did it last
Yep.
weekend, didn't we?
Yep, we did. Yep.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, there we go. Good
Okay.
morning to
Everything's good.
everyone. Yep.
Everyone who's on, meaning nobody.
There's two people.
Anyway, that's okay. That's okay. That is all good. That is all good. Yeah, so this will be fun. It'll be a good day today, hopefully. Get out today and have some fun.
Go see the John Adams house.
And go see old Johnny Boy. Let's do some Rev War stuff today. That'll be good.
Morning,
Anyway.
Bill.
Oh, hey. Yeah, but it'll be good. It'll be good to get out today. It's nice. It's nice. I like doing this on a Saturday because we still have the whole weekend. Because usually we do this on a Sunday, and
I know. Then the weekend's like gone.
and sometimes every so often you
Gentilly, Darren's camera is working.
Oh, sorry to disappoint. John's
Good morning, Miranda. Good morning, Yankees and Stonewall haters. We don't hate Stonewall.
Oh, we don't hate Stonewall. As far as you know. No, I don't dislike Stonewall at all. I think Stonewall's one of the best. I just don't think he's this transcendent. I don't think his death site should be called a shrine.
No,
I don't
it's
think he's
not
that big
anymore,
of a deal.
though.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm just saying it's
Morning,
I
Tony.
get it.
Morning, Barbara.
I get it. I think he's a very important person. He's one of Lee's best generals. But I think I was reading this morning. Someone was saying that his death is why the North won, which is ludicrous. It's ridiculous. But,
yeah, I mean, it was like Jackson was a big loss because of, I think, the relationship he had with Lee, that they were able to read each other really, really well. And Lee didn't really have that with, I don't think had that as strongly with, say, like Longstreet or some of the other ones.
Well, but that's a little bit overplayed, though. And admittedly, that's a little bit overplayed because they were both subordinates, and there's that famous quote about Jackson lost his arm, I lost my right arm, all that stuff. But I mean, I think he was somebody who who helped. He helped offset that management style Lee had.
Yeah.
Right. We said before, Lee was a macro manager. He would tell you, I want you to go take that hill, but he won't tell you how to do it.
Yeah.
Versus Stonewall was very specific on what he wanted.
Yes.
So with his subordinates, guys like Richard Stoddard Ewell, people like that, those people, A.P. Hill, who were under him, got very specific orders. So when Ewell, especially Ewell, but both him and Hill, when they got orders from Lee, come concentrate at the Cashtown, Gettysburg area. Well, they're like 8 miles apart. So what the hell?
Yeah, it's like, what does that mean?
And that's the biggest thing. Is I think Lee could rely on someone like Jackson to sit there and say, because someone said they were of the same mind and all that. That's budget. That's not true. It's ridiculous. But
I mean, it is. It is over.
No, but I mean, so he would say, I want you to just do this, and he would do it. Now, obviously, Jackson's stroke of genius was Chancellorsville. I know you don't want to hear about it because it brings up bad memories for you.
I completely agree. And I'm sure if you could go back and ask Oliver Otis Howard what he thought, it would have been the same thing. I think he would have said the same. I think Howard would have said, yeah, that was a great moment. And I got told, but anybody in that position. And Howard knew in his memoirs, he wrote about it. Morning, David. Morning, Jim. Morning, Frank. Hey. Yes, it is 160th of Yellow Tavern.
That's right. Yellow Tavern, May 11th. That's a good one. I mean, that's a very interesting battle. And we were down there. Where the hell were we recently? Well, we saw the Sheridan sign. We saw Ewell's camp sign. I mean, Jeb Stuart's camp sign.
When we were going to Spotsylvania. And
it was down in that area. I remember we went down to Massaponax. That's where it was. Yeah. Right. And we saw that, and that's a fascinating campaign because it was one of those, your U.S. Grant and your two children are fighting. George Meade and Phil Sheridan.
Yeah.
right? And you say, go to your rooms.
Yeah.
And go to your rooms means get Sheridan the hell out of here. Go, he wants to go chase Jeb. That's fine. He'll go do that. I'm going to risk my entire cavalry to go chase him because that's how much of a pain in the ass Sheridan and Meade were
Yeah.
with each other. And this comes off of that early part of the Overland campaign and how much Meade, I mean, Grant doesn't get a lot of credit or backlash for doing that because when you look at Spotsylvania, right, you look at all the carnage that went there and how much that could have gone badly for the Union because they had no cavalry, none,
Yeah.
because he sent them off to go chase Stewart, and it worked out well because I mean Jeb Stewart. I mean you're talking, you know, you're not talking about like Yellow Tavern about a couple hundred people. You got 12,000 Union, 5 or 6,000 Confederates going at it, right? And you end up with over 1,000 combined casualties, including Jeb Stewart. So this was not a milk run. This was a big
Yeah.
deal. And then you look at Spotsylvania. That whole how that whole thing went down. Yeah, it's crazy time. Crazy time.
No, that's yeah, and the other thing too. I mean, I, really enjoyed, I shouldn't say enjoy Yellow Tavern because it's a battle, right? But just the whole thing with John Huff is the one that pulls the trigger that wounds Jeb that causes his death, right? And he's Canadian, and his story is sad because 3 weeks later he gets badly wounded, goes back to Michigan and he dies there, and he's buried in Armada or Armada. I'm not sure how you say it, but he's buried there.
Either way, someone's going to complain about it.
I know, yeah. Either way, someone's going to complain about the way I say it, but like, I think like that I find really interesting, and just the whole like you can see the politics that are going on, and ever since we talked to Guelzo and the impact of politics in the Eastern Theater versus the Western Theater, like I think some of what Sheridan was doing was he had more free reign in the Western Theater. I think a lot of them did, and when he went east, I think the politics hit him, and he was like
Yeah.
all of us. And I think that's, I'm not a fan of Sheridan. I don't like him. I think he's great at cavalry, in some ways overrated. I like your analogy of him where he's like a lottery ticket where you win every 10th time. And
Yeah.
that's, he has his great moments.
Yeah,
Like,
just when you think you need to cut the cord with him, he does something great. He'll have Stones River. He'll have Cedar Creek, and those are his big moments. Cedar Creek is obviously his biggest moment from Winchester, but he's somebody who got, for a short man syndrome there, which is probably the issue. He got a little big in his britches going down the stretch after Petersburg, and you have two gigantic egos with him and Governor Kimball Warren.
Oh God,
which ends up being a big issue down the stretch. And Warren gets fired, and takes his ball and goes home, and then he dies and gets buried and he refuses a military funeral, and ends up in Rhode Island for eternity, which is I would not wish that on anybody. But I think it's interesting though how in the politics is the big thing. Was as you go east, you're dealing with that, and people don't really talk about the politics. And the politics is no different than it is now. It really isn't, and it's interesting because you have people like you said have free reign in the West, like Howard, for example, like Blackjack Logan, for example, people like that, right? And you come closer to here, and everything's scrutinized.
Everything is political. It's very political. And in the West, it's just, and I think it's the commanders you had out there. You had like Sherman, especially after Grant left. Sherman wanted nothing to do with the politics at all. There's that quote.
Probably a smart call.
Yeah, and that was good on his part. And I think, Howard and Slocum going out west was the best thing for them because they were able to kind of like do more of the military thing as opposed to all the politics that is factoring into the Eastern Theater. No, I'm sure there was some politics in the West as well, but it wasn't as strong. And because you're further away from Washington, you're not going to be as it was fine before.
I know. I just hate things. It's tilted. It's driving me crazy. Anyway, but the politics is a big part of it. And Meade and we talked a lot about this before. And you look at the Army of the Potomac with those 7 corps commanders. Most of them weren't Republicans. Most of them were Democrats. And they realize if I succeed, the succeed is going to ultimately go to Lincoln. If I fail, he's going to blame me. And that was one of the more fascinating parts of our talk with Allen Guelzo, because he hit the nail on the head. And a lot people don't always think about that when he's talking about Williamsport, July 13th, 1863. Mary Lee's getting ready to escape, and Lee, he set up that defensive line. if he coming off Gettysburg, if Meade attacks that and gets his ass kicked, despite the fact that Lincoln says he'll take the blame, he knows he's not going to take the blame. He knows
Yeah.
he's going to blame Meade, fire Meade for it. So he has to be cautious for his own sake. How that later played out to Grant coming east to babysit the Army of the
Yeah.
Potomac, it's tough to say, but it's a real thing. And specifically, guys like John Reynolds refused the job
Yeah.
because of politics. I mean, why in the world your first corps commander would you refuse to take that job when it's going to be another star, it's going to be another feather in your cap? Because he didn't want to deal with Lincoln, and he didn't want to deal with Halleck, and didn't want to deal with Stanton. And a lot of these other guys were the same way. You saw what happened to Abner Doubleday. He has, by all accounts, just invents baseball. He's feeling good about himself, right?
Just invents baseball.
The Indians just win their most recent World Series, so he's feeling pretty good about himself. He has a great day at Gettysburg. Reynolds goes down. He wisely saves, the Iron Brigade, puts Rufus Dawes 6 Wisconsin to attack the railroad cut. He does everything right at Gettysburg. The next day, he gets replaced by John Newton.
Yeah.
Again, because Doubleday's politics go in the face of the rest of them.
Yeah.
And he was pissed off at that, and never really got over that. And that's a big part about it, is you're fighting against an uphill stream. I don't know what that freaking phrase is, but whatever the hell it is, that's what you're going with. But that's what it is. And so it's tough. You assume these guys are all lock, stock, and barrel fighting for the cause. They're going to do this.
They're not.
No, they're not. They're worrying about their own reputations, worrying about themselves. And you see it later in the war when, like we say, when the musical chairs slow down, Mary. It's been a while. You see it because you see people positioning themselves, and you see who the presidents come out of this. Obviously, Grant, right? Guys like McKinley. A lot of people, guys like Garfield.
Yeah.
And you see people like Winfield Scott Hancock running. No, not for the ice cream truck, Mary. Running for the White House, right?
About the MJ Pat signal.
but that's what, and so you see how all the machine parts start to work politically as a system. Don't forget, war is a wing of politics. It's the furthest wing of politics, and that's what this whole thing was.
Yeah, and that was like, talking with Guelzo about that, which our episode about that is going to drop in a few days, was very, very fascinating to me. And it made me start to look at things a little bit differently. Like, I can see, for instance, like Howard going west must have been so good for him, because just before he left, there was all that stuff that went down with him being named. So he's named 3 victors for Gettysburg: Hooker, Meade, and Howard, named by Congress. And that really got under Hancock's skin. And Hancock's people started slamming Howard in the papers, saying, oh, he's doing this for political reasons, blah, blah, blah. And there's these letters back and forth between the two of them, and Howard's trying to say, I didn't ask for this. And they're trying to make it into this whole like big political thing. And then I think the other thing that was happening too, and Howard doesn't write about this in his memoirs, it's in a letter to his wife, Elizabeth, that he says, I might be taking over the Second Corps. And that's because Hancock was wounded and they needed a commander. And that must have, if Howard knew about that, then others knew about it too. And I think that was playing into it. So I think when Howard finding out, all of a sudden he just finds out he's going west. I think that was like, must have been such a relief for him, knowing that he wasn't going to have to deal with that stuff. And I mean, him taking over the Second Corps would have been a huge culture shock for everybody involved, because he's not well liked by Gibbon at all. Because Howard's got the whole religious thing. And I'm assuming too that I'm guessing Gibbon was a Democrat and Howard was a Republican.
Howard was the only really abolitionist corps commander, really, who wore it on his sleeve. Most of them, I mean, you had the over the top ones, guys like Reynolds, guys like Hancock, guys like Sykes, right, who would just open about what they were fighting for, and it wasn't for emancipation. Yeah. But it trickles all the way down. You know what? I have Edward Cross on the brain for a thing we're doing here in a few weeks. And this is a guy who was passed over 12 times for brigadier general because first of all, he was kind of a prick. He hated immigrants. He didn't like blacks, which is surprising from a guy from New Hampshire.
Yeah.
That they would have that. but that's how he was, and because of that, 12 different generals put in for promotion for Edward Cross 12 times. 12 times he
Wow.
got turned down. And so when he goes to fight at Gettysburg, it's, he has that famous, this will be my last battle thing. No one knows whether he thought he was going to die or he was going to give it the old quit and say, I'm
Yeah.
done. And so that happened a lot with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
Was if you went against and your politics did not jive with the big man in Washington,
Yeah.
you were going to run into roadblocks. Now, again,
Yeah.
admittedly, there were a lot of guys who did get promoted who felt that way. Certainly Hancock, certainly Reynolds, certainly Sykes, guys like that. But a lot of them definitely got held down. Um, Cross hated immigrants. He hated the fact that he had within his division an Irish brigade.
Oh my God.
Hated them, right? Could not stand Patrick Kelly, could not stand Irish, like the movie Lincoln. He hated God for creating Irish, right?
Okay.
But that's how he was though. And that was a very common belief with a lot of the men. And it held people back. Politics was a big deal. It
Yeah.
was.
I'm reading Lou Wallace's biography right now that was came out. I think it came out in the early 2000s. Um, and I'm not very far into it, but in the introduction, they talk about how like Lou Wallace had obviously a lot of struggles, but one of the things that factors into what happens to him at Shiloh is politics. Wallace is a political general. He's not trained at West Point, and Halleck didn't like him for that. Halleck wanted guys that had been at West Point. He didn't, and that's, some of what happens with Wallace is to do with politics. And there's very
Mhm.
much like, I'm picking up kind of the just now Wallace, he's arrogant. He's really full of himself and stuff. But at the same time, I still do side with him about Shiloh because that was a real
Right.
shitty thing. Like they did. So Tim Smith does the introduction to this book, and he talks about how he got all these maps and put them all on the table and tried to figure out modern day where was Wallace going. And he and the author went on that 14-mile walk one day. And they said there's no like what Wallace did was just he tried his best kind of thing. Um, and it's really like the author uses a lot of like obviously primary sources and stuff, but and Wallace's dad went to West Point, and that's why I'm really surprised that Wallace didn't go.
Right.
But he became a lawyer eventually, and apparently Wallace in school was this like we're going to do an episode about him in a few weeks, but apparently he was like no discipline at all, and he finally had a teacher that was able to get him to focus. And that's when like Wallace was a really good speaker. He was a really good writer. But he's like a guy that politics is factoring in because he's not the West Point guy.
Well, the West Point thing, yes, that was kind of a watchword. He didn't go to West Point, but a lot of it was because their politics didn't jive with the
Yeah.
people ahead of them. And we saw that obviously flipping the coin. This was not unique to the Union. We've talked a lot about Patrick Cleburne
Yeah.
and how politics got him. Some people don't agree with that, especially Southern people, that he was held back because of his proclamation he made about freeing the slaves, fight for the Confederacy. But again, these are humans, and you're dealing with a different time. You're not talking
Yeah.
2024, the hell freaking year we're in right now. You talk about an era when things were very, very different. And some of these northern states, Maine, New Hampshire specifically, I mean, honestly, they were not a friend of the African American at that point, because a lot of them relied on their economy was based on the slaves. You mentioned Maine a lot. They were catching fish, specifically lobster of all
Yeah.
things.
Lobster was like considered not a delicacy like it is
Right.
now, right?
And they were shipping it to the plantations to feed the slaves. So there was a big economy with that. So that was, and that's why you see a lot of the Copperhead movement in some
Yeah.
of those New England states. Massachusetts was the opposite. I mean, you had your people here who felt the same way, but for the most part, it was way more
There was
abolitionists, obviously,
much more of an
especially the city.
Yeah, much more of an abolitionist feel here, like, during
Yeah.
that time. AQ says, good point in New Hampshire during cultural context of where these men was an important part of who they were. Same with Barlow. He didn't like immigrants, Germans in particular.
Yeah. I mean, that was we've talked about this a lot. I mean, people talk about, the African American, the Irish specifically. My words cannot overestimate how much the Irish were hated in these cities here, Boston, Philly, New York. And it was a big, big deal. And you saw that specifically when we did the draft riots in July of 63. We talked about that. these internal squabbles, these natural biases and prejudices played a huge part in all this. And you put some of these guys in your specific. You look at Jim Caldwell. You look at Caldwell's division,
Yeah.
right? You're going to have Cross. You're going to have John Rutter Brooke and Samuel Zook and Patrick Kelly. Patrick Kelly is obviously the old Irish Brigade, 69th New York, 29th Massachusetts,
Yeah.
right? They were, despite what the movie plays off.
Yeah.
And my apologies to Buster for John Gentili,
Buster.
but they were kind of stuck on the end. And a lot of it was a Catholic thing. I
Yeah.
mean, Hancock was not a Catholic, but he came to watch Father Corby
Yeah.
do his thing. But he was kind of almost like I don't want to say a weird curiosity to see it. They fought hard, but the internal squabbling and the politics is a reason why the Irish are always in the front line. I mean, you want to look
Yeah.
at Antietam. You know, you're charging the sunken row with smoothbores, and the Rebs have rifle muskets, and they're getting picked off. And they're the front of they're told to be the front of the line.
Yeah,
Thomas Mars guys, and I mean, a lot of it was because they were, and that's why a lot of the Irish in New York City, in Boston, and Philly didn't want to sign up because they were basically like dogs. They were the ones who were going to be first. They were going to be cut down because who cared? They're Irish.
Yeah.
It's a big deal that no one really talks about.
Yeah. MJ just said Hancock was an Episcopalian.
Right, and so he he was someone who was a complete different guy. And there's not a shot on Hancock. Now, most of them were. There weren't a lot of Catholics, but for the most part. But when you look at how his beliefs and his politics played out, it was clearly after January 1st, 63, when the goal of the war changed. A lot of these guys went different directions mentally. You know, and like we said before, with Cross was, I mean, he was he was done with all this. Like I said before, did not like immigrants, did not care about the slavery thing. Big drinking guy. Like I said, typical New Hampshire. From Lancaster, New Hampshire, you know.
I just had to look it up because I couldn't remember off the top of my head what religion Howard was, but he was evangelical Christian.
Yeah, no, he was. Hancock liked going to the Episcopalian church because they had the cookies, Mary.
I'm just going to RKO you.
That's why by 1864 his butt looked like 50 pounds of chewed bubblegum by the end.
Oh my God.
Good morning, MJ. How are you? Good to see you.
She missed the ice cream truck joke.
Oh, that's a standard one. But it is important to think about, though, when you look at this stuff, because I think when you see the movies and you see the TV shows and History Channel stuff, it looks like it's one set of teams going against the other, and they all have the same goal. And it just doesn't. It just has a whole different play to it.
Yeah.
And when you get really into the diaries and the real nitty gritty of the story, like Pete Carmichael's story or Gelzo's book, I mean, War for the Common Soldier from Pete, or the Letters from Gettysburg for Gelzo, you really get an insight into how these dudes thought and felt. And it's fascinating sometimes because it changes your mindset a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely does. Like, oh, Barlow was a Unitarian.
Yeah.
Have I heard of that religion before? Yes, I have.
Yeah.
I don't think, what is that?
I mean, it's because you're a heathen. You don't know. You walk into a church and lightning strikes you, Mary. You wouldn't know.
Actually Presbyterian. Actually, I'm Anglican.
The only time you say any religious name is when you're driving, I've noticed. Which is not a good sight.
Please don't. but yeah, like the immigrant thing is, you know, there's so many layers to the Civil War when you start to study it and go beyond the battles and you see the politics and you see what's happening and that these guys are not necessarily fighting for the same thing, which we've said many times.
Yeah.
But I mean, and we were out with friends last night and I was telling our one friend, you know, he's just getting into studying Gettysburg, which is really, really cool. And I'm like, well, you have to study Chickamauga after that. Like you have to move into the Western theater and look at that because it's so different from the Eastern theater. And he's like, his favorite guy right now is Buford, which I was like, that's really awesome. And then I said, I'm like,
is this Eric you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, where did he finds out about the beavers, Mary?
Oh, God. But I was telling him, if you want a really good cavalry story, another one from the Western theater, look at Benjamin Grierson.
Yeah, it's funny because we were sitting down shockingly at a brewery last night in the city with some friends, and Eric was one of the guys you mentioned, and we went to Gettysburg with him last August, and he got the bug. He got bit by the Gettysburg bug, and everybody has a a person they gravitate to in the war.
Yep.
And like you just said, he loves it. He's a former army
He was in
guy.
cavalry.
He was in the cavalry, and so he gravitated towards Buford, and now he's obsessed with all things John Buford, which is awesome because that he was able to kind of, get a little bit of that bite. So now he's on his way to like the rest of us being this whatever the heck we are.
Yeah, Frank says that Ben Gerson's becoming one of his favorites. Yes, Tim Smith's book about him is so good. The Real Horse Soldiers. And
we
Ben,
had fun with Tim Smith the other day.
We were on so Bjorn from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop does Facebook Lives from the bookshop, and Tim Smith's, I think it's like another book in his Vicksburg series came out. And listening to Tim Smith is like you could listen to him read the phone book. He's like Shelby Foote in that way.
He's got that Shelby Foote voice.
Yeah.
But we've had him on here, and we're gonna have him on again here pretty soon.
And
and he's so laid back and he's so much fun. And he's on with Bjorn, who's the same. And they were sitting like next to each other talking about it instead of split screen, which I think is kind of interesting.
Talking about and I want to read all his books about Vicksburg because he really drills down what is happening. And this latest book is just about 2 weeks in the campaign, which is really interesting. And he was talking, it's escaping me what he was talking about, but it was just fascinating to listen to. Talk about
he was, but because he is like, he's like the Vicksburg whisper. There's probably nobody in the world who knows Vicksburg better than Tim Smith. I know Donald L. Miller has got his book and Winston Groom has it. I get that, but his books that he writes, and he's got a book coming out here, Iron Dice of Battle, here pretty soon with
it's already out
with Albert Sidney Johnson, right?
We have it.
And when you talk about, his book, when he talks about Grierson, and he talks about the landing at Bruinsburg and how he goes to Jackson, and how much Benjamin Grierson was in Pemberton's head at Vicksburg, and how much he helped keep his eye away from Grant, is a brilliant maneuver. And the landing at Bruinsburg was the largest amphibious landing until D-Day in American history. That's how big this thing was. In his raid, Grierson's raid,
he's kind of like a John Mosby in the Western Theater because nobody could find him.
Right. The only difference is Mosby was going and he was Beetlejuice and stuff. He was being a pain in the ass, especially guys like Sheridan. But Grierson was just there, and they sent Forrest out to chase him, and they didn't really get him. And Grierson would beat him by like one day.
Yeah.
And he ended up making this fun run all through the area. Was able to get back, and he just, because he had his presence, it scared the hell out of the Confederacy. And this is a guy who was not a military background.
He's a music teacher.
He's a music teacher. He's that whole deal, like my old piano teacher, right? Old Lori Pilla. Imagine her riding, but that's how it was, and he was a hero for it. And this is a guy who wasn't, where maybe the West Point training wasn't, not having it wasn't a bad thing because he wasn't bound by the Jomini stuff. He just did his thing, and his men loved him. The movie, this might be blasphemy. I thought the movie sucked. It's
not very good. I remember my mom loved John Wayne, and she was like, it's not his best.
Because you know why? Because he plays John Wayne.
He plays John Wayne in everything.
Right. He's like, he's like Kevin Costner. Every movie he's in, he plays himself, right? Yeah. Or Tom Hanks even.
I love Tom Hanks.
I know, but he's kind of the same.
That Mr. Rogers movie was so good.
That was very good. There's no question about that. But Grierson, and when you talk about the great cavalry people in American history for the Civil War, you're going to think of, obviously you're going to think of Jeb Stuart. You're going to think of, you're going to think of John Hunt Morgan, John Mosby. You're going to think of, obviously Custer, but you're not going to think of Ben Grierson. And the thing
Miranda just said he's underrated, and I definitely agree with that.
You can make a case that Ben Grierson's cavalry is the most important one. Now, Jeb Stuart's run around McClellan. There's a lot of them, but that one on the Union side is so important at the time. Because it allowed Grant to focus more and have the Confederacy focus on other things. Look at Joseph E. Johnson.
Yeah.
He's sitting, after Sherman goes out there, he decides I could either go across the Big Black and Champion Hill, and I can go help support the Confederacy, or I can say screw this and stay here. We're not going to win. So that's what he does. In Vicksburg, and we said before, Vicksburg doesn't happen if Island Number 10 doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Right. So all these battles, all these smaller battles, all work their way to the big one. That's why it's great to study this stuff and some of these small pieces that lead up to it.
Yeah, because they're so important in what's happening in the war. Um, I mean, I would love to see a remake of the Horse Soldiers movie with more of a historical accuracy to it, to tell more like, because back then it was like a cowboy movie, right?
You can make it modern, put them on motorcycles.
That'd be amazing.
It can be a street gang.
Yeah, and
You
MJ
know.
just mentioned that, and Frank had brought this up earlier, mortal wounding 160 years ago today at Yellow Tavern.
Yeah, yeah. That
Shot
was a
by a
big. That was
Canadian.
yeah. That was a big. Well, a lot of people deny it. Who the heck? Somebody was like very,
Somebody
very
was going at me one time about that and
right.
said, we don't know for sure, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's the
How dare
story.
you say that? You weren't there.
I know. I'm like,
Imagine my surprise reading that. I was
like, dude,
so dis. It's like what the hell?
I'm
But
like,
but but
God,
but I mean,
it's
but
the
I think
story.
that's the story, and who knows? But that's the case. But again, we've talked a lot about Sheridan, right? This was a big deal. It was because even though you're risking the entire shoot match, this is
Yep.
Grant because Overland campaign's going on because Spotsylvania is happening now too.
Hmm.
And now you got no cavalry. You got old Winnie Boy and Lost in the Woods with Barlow. That must have been a fun conversation, right?
God.
And then you end up having to send your cavalry to go chase him, but it did keep Stuart away,
Yeah.
right? So it did have its benefits. But again, there's a reason why, Richard Ewell wanted to keep his cannon at Spotsylvania because they're like, we don't have any eyes here.
Yeah.
And Lee's like, no, we're going to take the cannon. Then they rush them back. The whole story of Spotsylvania, which is a great one. But this Yellow Tavern isn't just the Battle of Yellow Tavern. It's the lead up and what the ramifications it had for the Overland campaign,
Yeah.
which is what's cool about it. If you think about it.
No, it's very interesting. And, like I said, like the guy that killed Jeb Stuart, allegedly, I'll just throw allegedly in there, he gets wounded 3 weeks later and ends up passing away in Michigan.
Yeah.
Where he was from. Well, he was from Canada originally. I think he was from, actually, I think he's from like Toronto area originally.
Is he from a small town in Western Ontario
Called
called
No.
Goderich? But there's a lot of these guys. You want to say B-level guys like Grierson, but there are a lot of people who don't get the press that they should, right?
Yeah.
That's what's cool. That's what's pretty sweet.
Grierson's
That's why a lot of
definitely, and I think there's more of them in the Western theater that don't get the press as opposed to the Eastern, although there are some in the Eastern theater, like David Ireland, but he's in both Eastern and Western theater. And like I think someone like Minty and Wilder don't get, especially you're more raw, you're more of Minty, and I'm definitely more of Wilder.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things. I just think that Minty had a little more of a job to
I
do.
think he had a tougher day because he
Right.
actually initially had to send guys down to Wilder, and then he's like, I have nobody left.
Yeah, no, that whole thing, and Chickamauga is a great visit, by the way. I mean, anybody who's been at Chickamauga knows that, but if you haven't been at Chickamauga, you got to do it. It's one of those battlefields that is just absolutely pristine. It's a little bit like Antietam with more trees.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, Ed Lowe, our friend Ed, he's and people like guys like Lee White and other people we know do such a good job helping to tell that story. But again, it's one of those things. Because that was that whole Army of the Tennessee thing with them and the army in Bragg's Army of Tennessee, that was not a slam dunk for the Union here. That was not
No.
I mean, because at that point you're coming off Stones River, you're coming off Tullahoma campaign, everything's going good, everything's gonna be great.
Yeah.
It's 28-3. We got this, right?
And then you spread your army out.
Right.
And Thomas, the Eeyore of the Army of the Tennessee, comes up to you and is like, oh no, I think we need to bring everybody back together because I think Bragg's doing stuff. And then Rosecrans kind of like, nah, no, he's not. And then they find out, and he's got to like get his army back together. Geraint mentions Lord Percy doesn't get much acclaim, nor does James Wilson, yet he did his job.
We haven't mentioned Percy Wyndham in this podcast in a while. I'm so glad somebody brought him up. But that's true though. And so when you look at how these things change, I mean, you talk about some of the 180s that you look at going out there, Tullahoma, everything's looking great. Then you get your ass handed to a Chickamauga, you get chased back to Chattanooga. It's very similar to what happened right after Second Manassas, right?
Yep.
Confederates are doing right. They're doing everything's going well. You get Antietam, you get driven back by McClellan, and it's a sea change. It changes the mentality of the armies at that point. The one we talked about recently, with Jamestown, you're going from the Confederacy, going from the defense to flipping the switch on June
Yeah.
1st, 62 to offense, leading the 7 days, and McClellan going offense to defense. Everything changes, all because of specific events that happen. So when you look at some of these big battles, you look at the ones that forced, the genesis of these battles and why they ended up getting there.
And
Right?
there's little battles leading up to Chickamauga that are interesting. There's the story too of Wilder's guys. Remember they were making it seem like there was a ton of people around, and that's what got Bragg to vacate Chattanooga, and Union's able to walk in there and just take the city without a fight. And at that point, if that were me, I would be like, something's not right. Like I would be like, my spidey sense would be up. I'd be like, this is
well,
too
yeah. But we mentioned before,
too easy.
Nathan Kimball, the only guy to beat Leanne Jackson in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Right? Sheep Mountain and Kernstown.
Yeah.
But again, though, that's what's cool about this stuff. You can tell these stories, these people, so MJ's on here. So, and she does a good job. She's part of that union of generals thing she's part of. And she has all these people who travel in Gettysburg, where I think of mostly, and they all portray specific characters and they stay in character. Right?
Yeah. Which
is pretty cool. And so you can have some fun conversations with them at places like the mine, and they're in character, which is pretty neat. But
I asked Buford at the mine. I'm like, what was up with that letter with Howard? Did you actually time? And he actually agreed. Like, his take on it was that Buford was not saying anything bad about Howard. He was just wondering what the hell was going on.
There was one time years ago, and that group, and they keep these people alive. We'll talk more about something to do with MJ here pretty soon. But I was, what the hell was I? I was in Gettysburg, and there was a Mexican place right on Steinwehr, and General Grant, of all things, is sitting in there eating like a taco salad. I walk in there, of course, I have a couple of beers, man. So I go, General Grant, eating Mexican, you eating tacos. You like tacos? And he just looks at me, and goes, I learned the taste of Mexico. And he kept eating the It was hilarious. It was just so friggin' funny. But these guys stay in character with it, which is really, really good. I know Grant wasn't in Gettysburg, so I don't want to hear bullshit, but that's where he was,
Yeah. Durant mentioned, I could be wrong, but I don't believe Forrest threatened to kill Bragg to his face, simply because if he had, Bragg would have had him arrested. You threatened to murder your commanding general and get away with it. Yeah, I've heard that story too. I think it was a letter and not a face-to-face meeting. But whatever the case, even if it's not true, the whoever wrote that letter is brilliant, because Bragg or Forrest I don't blame him for being angry. Bragg took away part of his cavalry. There was something going, like they didn't like each other at all. And Forrest, after Chickamauga, was coming to Bragg and saying, we can get the Union guys now. And Bragg is like, no.
A lot of these guys didn't like each other. And that doesn't mean, think about your own jobs, right? I guarantee you there are people on this thing who, on their own specific jobs, there's somebody in their office they just don't like, right?
Yeah.
But they have to work with them, and you have to pull the line, pull the rope, right? And that's the same thing. But the Bragg Forrest thing, my own personal opinion is Forrest probably told somebody else, and history changed it. Eventually, he told him to his face. Because a lot of times, but we saw a lot of that, people talking about people they just didn't get along with. Your boy Howard.
Yep.
Sherman couldn't stand him, but he respected him.
Sherman and Howard were friends.
Well, I think the religion thing was a big thing for Howard and Sherman.
But they were friends until he died.
Couldn't say it was probably too strong of a word, but they were not going to be doing each other's nails anytime
soon. No, but they
right?
Post-war, they hung out together and they went to the opera.
But if you better example, Joseph Hooker couldn't stand Howard.
Oh no.
Right.
That's a much better example.
He had that quote about, he should be wearing a petticoat versus a Union coat.
He blamed Howard for Chancellorsville. And when he left the Western Theater, one of the last things he did was he blamed Howard again for Chancellorsville. And then Howard's got to write Elizabeth. And it's a really funny letter where he basically tells Liz, he's like, yeah, so you're going to be reading some stuff about Chancellorsville in the paper and about me, and it's going to be Hooker's guys. I just want to forewarn you and he was so nonchalant about it, and kind of like, it was like he reached his F this with it. And he's like, there's nothing I can do. This guy's going to go home and badmouth me again. And he's really good about forewarning his wife about it.
Well, I mean
Just
that's
so
the
you
thing.
know.
That's the thing too, and that's why it was good that he got the hell out of Dodge and he went out west because it got away from a lot of that stuff. But
Yeah.
again, yeah, people have their own individual things. They're from different parts of the country, different parts, different states. They all have their different philosophies, and that's true. You know.
Gentilly, I've been staying in character for 40 years, MJ.
Yeah, he certainly has. John Gentili. We've seen him in character a few times, actually.
Seen him in character when he nearly got hit by a car.
Yeah, it's fun to be in character sometimes, but it's true.
He
Yeah,
should go to Gettysburg and be in character as Buster the whole time.
yeah. Well, he should be. He should join and be Buster. You know, if he did a presentation on Buster Culrane, I swear to God, half the people will think it's true.
Oh, I know.
It's like the people who ask where he's buried in the battlefield. Did he bury him? You know,
MJ, you're Buster reincarnated. AQ
might be.
mentions, I find it interesting that post-war in New York, Barlow and Carl Schurz were seen together often at events. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean these people. I mean, your brothers in arms. You're in the
Yeah.
11th Corps. You know, Schurz did kind of was the boss there for a little while at Gettysburg, but they were, you know, they're running their divisions and they all had their own things. But it's I think as the war went on, you saw a lot of you're going to have your people like the Jubal Earlys of the world. You're going to have those guys, but for the most part, they definitely softened to each other. I mean, the only one that comes to mind that didn't, Robert E. Lee never forgave George Pickett, never did.
No.
You know, and so, but obviously, you look at some of these odd bedfellows that came out of it, guys like Sickles and Longstreet.
Oh yeah, that's an interesting, and two, like even in the Union Army, you have Dan Sickles going to Oliver Otis Howard's, I think it's his 70th birthday, and being the keynote speaker. Like
Yeah.
that shocked me when I found that out. That I'm like, holy, Dan Sickles is the keynote speaker at Howard's birthday.
Well, he was famous. I mean, he was. I mean,
But that
Dan
was probably just
Sickles.
a roast Howard night.
It probably was. Speaking of roast, I think that Tom Brady roast that
Oh
was good.
God, yeah. Yeah, AQ mentions Howard and Barlow were distant cousins. We found both graves, I think, of their ancestors in this area too.
Yeah, Barlow's buried right where he went to college. He's right on the corner from there. That was fun going to that day, going to the gravesite that day. And he's nondescript again. He's probably besides AQ. I don't know, and no one goes over there. Probably you could see her, you know, rose petals leading up to his grave. A couple of Boy Scout badges pinned on the wall. That's about it, probably. But that's how it was. But no one goes and visits these people. Don't know who General Barlow is. I mean, unfortunately, they should, but they don't.
Yeah. Durant mentions Hooker fought well in Chattanooga and Atlanta, and both Sherman and Grant didn't like him, and that's why he was driven out eventually. But he mentions, and I agree with this, like, Grant really belittled Lookout Mountain in his memoirs, and I do think that's unfair. Calls it, and it's like
He calls it a romance.
Yeah, pure romance.
Pure romance. And I mean, we mentioned politics a while ago. No one played the politics game better than Grant, right?
Yeah.
No one did. I mean, he really, I mean, you saw it initially with Rosecrants. Actually, you saw it initially with probably Halleck, and right back with Donaldson and Henry. Halleck wants to be the man.
Yeah.
Even after Fort Donaldson, Halleck wants him removed, and Abraham Lincoln has that no. He fights, keep him, and even though Grant, he probably butted heads with a lot of people in the Army. He always had Lincoln's support for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, I like Hooker. I think he's arrogant and he doesn't do himself any favors by having a big mouth, but I do like him, especially what he does with the AOP, with the reorganization. And I find it so fascinating in the Western theater when he's out there.
Who, Hooker?
Yeah.
No, Hooker was great because at least the beginning, because he does, like we said before, the way he kind of does builds what McClellan did at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Right, because McClellan had the corps, and they went back to wings. Now you have Hooker coming in, and you got the corps. He's going to have the artillery in every corps. He's going to have his own. He's going to do a lot of things that practicality made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
He basically steals the corps badge idea, but it works, right? It does, and he's going to ultimately end up kind of getting very popular with his men. But the problem with Hooker is that I think, we mentioned before how a lot of these guys are in people's heads.
Yeah.
Lee was in Hooker's head.
Yeah.
There's no question he was scared shitless of the ghost of Robert E. Lee around every corner. We saw that. And Meade was too. We saw that when he was down on the Culpeper V between Gettysburg and Bristol Station, right? So that's how these guys all felt. These guys have cult of personalities. Jeb Stuart had it.
Oh,
Nathan
big
Bedford
time.
Forrest had, Grant had it. They all did. Grant was fooling Lee right till the very end, where he was trying to convince Lee that he was still trying to take Richmond. And so
Yeah.
you see Lee having to maneuver his men to Spotsylvania Courthouse because he had to block, and that's what all these battles were when the target was on Lee's head all along. He wanted Lee. That's just guys to
Yeah.
show how these things go. But I mean Hooker, I'm a Massachusetts guy, has got a statue here in the city and all that, and
That statue's
he's
so cool.
it is. There's a good picture you can go online. You can see all the people, like the dedication, how mobbed it was. If you
Yeah.
know the area, it's in the state capital, downtown Boston. But it's a good statue right across from the 54th Mass, which has some irony to the whole thing. Think about it,
Yeah.
right?
Oh,
But I mean,
yeah. And I found pictures recently of the dedication of the 54th in Boston.
yeah, no, and there's no question about it. But he's going to ultimately end up getting pushed back, and he the problem with him is a lot of these guys felt that they knew it all. McClellan felt he knew it all. Hooker felt they knew it all, and it caused issues for people back in Washington.
Yeah.
Right? I think Grant probably did know more, but he wasn't really arrogant about it. He played the
No.
game better.
Yeah.
The garrison at Harper's Ferry was the big deal with Hooker,
Yeah.
because he knew that he needed more men during the Gettysburg campaign,
Mhm.
and when he asked for it, they turned him down. He quit, and then Meade asked for it, and they pretty much gave it to him. Um, it just goes to show that sometimes you want people. If you can't fire a guy because you're firing everybody every 2 minutes in the army, and you want to get rid of him, but you can't. But he offers to quit. You take it.
Yep. Yeah.
You
And
know.
he feel like I do feel sorry for Hooker in some respects too. Like as
No,
well.
I mean he's like McClellan in a way.
Yeah.
You feel sorry for him, but a lot of it he did to himself. He put that sword of
Oh yeah.
Damocles right over his damn head and just
Yeah.
waited for someone to swing it. But he did do a lot of good things. He did.
Yeah.
In his efforts on Lookout Mountain were important because it helped keep Bragg's eyes to the south and away from Missionary Ridge when Thomas was doing his whole thing.
Yeah.
So he had to speaking of Dave Ireland, Mary, Lookout Mountain, right?
Yes.
Those guys.
Yeah.
But you had to keep an eye on that, and so it ultimately ended up the breakthrough. Claiborne's going to do his thing, keeping Sherman at bay,
Yeah.
but you're going to have Thomas, right, do his
And
thing.
Thomas gets downplayed in Grant's memoirs, and Sherman doesn't really he does not have a good day at Lookout Mountain or at Missionary Ridge at all.
Yeah,
He's going up against Claiborne and Granbury and those guys who are some of the best that Bragg has in his army. And I think the thing with Lookout Mountain too, it's very much also boosting morale because you finally see that American flag planted up on Lookout Mountain. And you've been besieged for however, just a few weeks at this time, or from September until November the 25th. And you finally see that American flag up there. And that must have been something for those guys in Chattanooga because they were starting to run out of supplies. But the Confederates were no shakes either for food. Claiborne's guys were on half rations and all, and it was starting to get really bad. And then if you're Claiborne, you're told you're going to go to Knoxville, and then you're getting ready to go to Knoxville, and Bragg's like, by the way, you're staying here now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys. You mentioned, Mosby. He was someone who did a lot of things that gets underplayed. I mean, he's kind of overplayed and underplayed depending on where you are. Fairfax, he's got it, but he really should be though. My favorite Mosby story, and the Stoughton story is the one everybody talks about, but my favorite one is when they blow up the train and they knock the train off the tracks because they want to take in a bunch of foreigners. I think they were from England. I might be wrong, but I thought they were from England. They all came to the United States because they wanted to see war.
Yeah.
And they robbed them all. And so Sheridan's sitting there, and he this is afterwards, and he sees all these British people in their underwear.
Yeah.
No, he goes, no, what happened was they robbed them all, and these people complained to Mosby. Mosby goes, "What are you people doing here anyway?" "Well, we wanted to see war." He goes, "I'm coming to tell you that I'm mad because your soldiers stole our clothes and they're in their underwear." And Mosby looks at him and he says, "Well, now you know what war is," and just laughs at him. That's probably my favorite Mosby story, because that perfectly personifies what he was. But yeah, these guys had good personalities. But Hooker was one. So go back to Hooker real quick. He was somebody who really gets he's more popular than other parts
Yeah.
of the country because he's a local guy. I get all that. Um, people realize the people who know history know what he did. They understand his reorganization. They
Yeah.
understand Lookout Mounts. And they understand what he did the early part of Chancellorsville. Because coming off Fredericksburg, that was a complete friggin' mess, right?
Oh yeah.
Able to, keep some of the army down there by the Rappahannock, be able to move the army across the Chancellorsville. That was all good stuff at that point. But he had Lee over a barrel and he blew it, and that
Oh
was the
yeah.
end of it.
Yeah. And then Geraint is mentioning Sherman said there was one biography that is the biography actually said it's hard to find a battle that Sherman won. And he mentions Chickasaw Bluffs is like Fredericksburg in the West.
Well, Chickasaw Bluff, the Sherman people don't like to talk about Chickasaw Bluffs, and
So bad.
I get it, but this is the same reason why the Grant people don't want to talk about Spring Hill.
Yeah.
Right. Because no one studies those battles, but they're probably the black mark on both those people. Right. Yeah. I mean, everyone knows Lee at Gettysburg and not a good deal. Obviously, people understand things like that. They see Chattanooga with Braxton Bragg. You see Knoxville with James Longstreet if you even study that. But no one studies Spring Hill with Grant when he gets beat by EVD, the man to be, right? EVD. But then, Chickasaw is a tough one, though, because that's when they were kept so stops and starts in the Vicksburg campaign.
And he had Sherman had bad maps, and he's going, I think that was, what's his face's best day in the Civil War for the Confederates. Was it S.D. Lee? It's his best day. He must have been riding high on that for a while because he does not have a good day after that.
Yeah, but they all have their good and their bad, and that's the reality of it. And it's fun you go on the social medias of the world and you find out the people who the Lee Jackson people or the Grant people or even the Howard people, right?
I'm
the
not
people
like that.
I know, but I mean the people who want to talk about the good times, right? Yeah. But they don't want to talk about the bad times. That what's that song?
We're here for the good times, not the.
I don't know what it is, but they don't want to talk about it. They want to talk about, and I get it. I don't like to talk about the Patriots losing Super Bowls. I don't want to talk. You don't want to talk about
I don't like to talk about 1948 World Series. And then Geraint mentions, and we've talked about this before. Geraint mentions for Lee, no one talks about the West Virginia campaign.
Well, that was early, and the thing about it too is people. And there's a really good book called The Man Who Would Not Be Washington. It's about Robert E. Lee, and really it's the early part of Lee, and it talks a lot about. And this Eric Wittenberg has got a great book on West Virginia, right? But the book on The Man Who Would Not Be Washington was fascinating because it focuses on the Lee's family's connection to the Washington family, which was a thing, especially on with Mary Washington. And he talks about specifically the reputation Lee had at this time, which was not very good. He went into this campaign with a black beard. When he left, it was white. That's when he got his white beard. And he got Washington's relative killed by a really bad recon mission at Sheep Mountain, right? And he got beat by Kimball. And so people don't talk about that with Lee, but it's a fascinating study because it's what created with the white beards where the whole Granny Lee thing came from, that nickname. And he comes back to Richmond. He's going to spend the next year basically working the coastal defenses of Virginia, the defenses of Richmond. He's going to be basically a military advisor to Jefferson Davis.
Yeah.
And he starts to kind of push a little bit towards Joseph E. Johnson in the Peninsula campaign. And that whole thing goes back, like we were saying before, about Yorktown with John Magruder. But it wasn't obviously until the 1st of June that he takes over. And then he has this transformation where he flips to this unbeatable guy, and that cult of personality continues. But the Western Virginia campaign is a real deal, and that's something it's small. It's not a big thing, but it's certainly one that McClellan does well in, and Lee does not do well in, and it lifts McClellan up, right?
Yep.
And so he's going to get the big man chair after First Manassas, the big boy chair, and it's going to push Lee down, and you see McClellan kind of go down, and Lee start to come up. So it's cool when you study when you see the early. It's like the early episodes of Seinfeld that suck, right? Yeah. But it creates something later. But you have to study the early parts just because it's more fun.
You absolutely, you do. And I think they're really, interesting. And the book we're going to be doing with Tim Smith for our book club is The Iron Dice of Battle, which is his book about Albert Sidney Johnson. And I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Oh
I
yeah.
watched the like Bjorn did a live with Tim Smith when the book came out, and someone asked like, how does Tim Smith research? And he doesn't really. I think he said he didn't really read any of the other biographies that were out there until
Mhm.
after, but like he just goes right to the primary source documents, which is how you should do it. And you let the documents speak for you, and you can have your readers like, make a decision on that. That's why it's,
Yeah.
when you have something like Order 191, which Stephen Sears wrote about, and other
Yeah.
authors go off that and they go off what Sears has written and they don't go and look more at, well, okay, what are the primary sources saying
Well,
about this?
that's what this book is. Hold it up
Yep.
right here, right?
Yep.
This is
Yes's
Gelso's new
book
book.
that's out this
It's
next
coming
week.
out the 21st of May, so it's coming on next week, I think that is.
Yep.
And what this whole book is the Gettysburg campaign from June 3rd up until July 13th, and it talks about the soldier stories, and then he uses the history, and then he fills the gaps in with soldier stories. And as much of the anti-Meade reputation he has, he does talk. He defends Meade a lot, um, especially towards the end for Williamsport. But it's a fascinating book. So we had him on a week or two ago now. This episode will drop next week, but I think next week, right?
Yep.
So no,
Yep. It's
this
going to
week,
drop
Friday.
Friday.
Right.
Friday. Yep.
But it's good though because it anytime in I've read so much on Gettysburg, it's ridiculous. But there's a lot of cool diary stories in here
Yep.
that I've never read before, and they're fascinating, and it definitely opens your eyes. But it's very balanced, and it's a good book if you like the letters and you like the notes and the papers. This book here. It's called Voices from Gettysburg: Letters, Papers, and Memoirs from the Greatest Battle of the Civil War by Dr. Alan C. Gelso. Comes out, pick it up. I'm telling you, pick it up because you'll like it. If you like Gettysburg, that book is going to be right up your alley. Don't no doubt.
Okay. I'm just going to type the name in the chat here for people.
Mhm.
So it's released May 21st, right?
It says
Yeah.
it says on sale May 21st, 2024. But I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. Hopefully people
Yeah, Frank said he's looking forward to it. Yeah, it's a good book.
And I will tell you, if you're doing the guide exam, buy this book and read it because it talks a lot about it talks a lot about some of the perceptions, and it talks a lot about it's all primary firsthand stuff. It's really on a detailed level as the Gettysburg campaign book by Coddington, but it's soldier letters.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. It's definitely good,
Yeah. Just reading some of the comments here. Jerry mentions the Gordon Chamberlain salute at Appomattox may not have happened.
Well,
I mean, is there enough evidence that it did?
I mean, both Gordon and Chamberlain say it did.
Yeah.
But again, it might have been a situation where it was not as flamboyant as they make it sound. Is that Gordon taps his horse's head down, taps his foot with his, who knows? But Gordon, the thing about Gordon is if you read his memoirs, he very, very pro-Southern. I don't know if you know this. Gordon.
Oh shit.
I know those. Did you see the Northern Lights? Yeah, yeah. The Northern Lights of aggression, he would call them, right? And so he definitely talks a lot about that, and he talks a lot about guys like Lew Wallace. He kind of explains a lot of stuff, but he goes into detail about what it is. So whether it did or not, no one will really know. But he remembers it. He talks about it.
Lew Wallace was in his head. After
but he also talks a lot. And the thing about Gordon is he talks a lot about the post-war stuff about guys. He talks a lot about Wallace, a lot about Chamberlain, a lot about the people he fought against in really glowing terms. So it's kind of like the way Longstreet does with Sickles, right? Yeah. So you don't know if he's just really helping to lift their boats and pump their tires historically. But his memoirs is a good one. And what's good about his memoirs is his post-war, what a dirty politician he was. That Gordon? Bourbon triumvirate down there in Georgia, right?
Not to mention that little group he got involved with as well.
Oh yeah, no, well, there's that too. But I mean, as far as the on the level stuff, as far as politics, but they're cool though. It's fun reading this stuff because you see them.
They're all part. And I do agree with AQ and Geraint. You have to take a lot of what Gordon says with a grain of salt. But that's like any memoir is going to put the person writing it in a different light. There's stuff about Howard's memoirs where I'm like, did it happen that way though, Howard?
Well, I mean, Gordon talks a lot about the Barlow injury, right, at Gettysburg, and there's that, right? But again, he writes, he talks in his memoirs a lot about the days in the war, in almost almost kind of in a Chamberlain-esque way,
Mhm.
writes about them very chivalrous, right? Where he talks about these grand moments and these things. Well, who the hell knows whether or not happened? It's a good story if it's true or not. And he
Well,
runs
I
into
think they're
Gordon,
writing.
he runs into Gordon at that dinner, and all that stuff later. Hey, do you know the
Yeah.
Gordon who was at Gettysburg? Oh, that was me.
Yeah, do
Oh
you know the
shit, I
bar?
thought you died. Oh, really? High
Oh.
five. You know, you know. But who knows? Who knows? But that's a good story. It's a fun story, so you go with
Yeah,
it.
it's interesting. And I mean, I think there was a time too when they were writing these memoirs that they're looking back at the Civil War, trying to look back at it with nostalgia. Went through a period that was when a lot of it's interesting. I just did an exhibit. My final project for grad school was a Civil War exhibit. And I had some lithographs that you and I, they're reproduction lithographs that you and I have, and I did some research behind them. And they were produced by Kurz and Allison out of Chicago. And it was at a time, 1880s, 1890s, when the Civil War was looked back upon a lot of nostalgia. So these lithographs they're not accurate depictions of the battle. They're beautiful pieces of art, though. But it's interesting that people were buying these and hanging them in their houses. And we have the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain and the Battle of Chickamauga. Um, again,
Yeah.
not accurate depictions of the battle, but it's still interesting. And the memoirs that came out after the Civil War, like you have Gordon's, you have Grant's is probably Grant's is one of my favorites. You have Sherman's as well, Howard's, Chamberlain's passing of the armies. You have all these guys that are writing their memoirs, and some of them are writing about the same things and they're telling a completely different story. Like Sherman in his memoirs doesn't mention Howard going to Knoxville, so Howard in his memoirs said, "Well, I went to Knoxville."
Yeah, no, I know, but any of these any of these diaries, of course, if they're memoirs to be published, I mean, they're what I did last summer stories, and of course you're going to take it with a grain of salt because they don't talk about their bad moments. They talk
Yeah.
about all the good things they did in their philosophy, which makes sense. But Gordon, obviously, you hinted at that a little bit ago. He has got a bad history with the Klan, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you read him, it's funny reading his. The thing about him is, if you read like Jubal Early, he stays on course the whole way.
Yeah.
Right. Gordon changes, and he almost like he whitewashes it because he's like, yeah, I joined that club in Stone Mountain, Georgia. I was under the impression it was a gentleman's club of like-minded business owners.
Yes.
And then I found out what they did. I should have known better when they told me to bring my own pillow sheet, but I went anyway. But he ends up getting out of it, and
Yeah.
Forrest comes along, but he talks about it like he's like Shaggy. It wasn't me. He didn't know.
Oh my
Like
God.
he went there and found out. He went there, it was a lot, but he obviously he's just
He
trying to
knew.
he's trying to put a positive spin on that. But hearing him talk about it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's kind of like a kid who breaks something at the house. Goes, I didn't know if I dropped the vase it would break. How am I supposed to do? But that's how he was. But it was but
Terrain's laughing at your car.
But it's true.
Bring a pillowcase to a meeting.
I should have known. Should have known. All the pillowcases the hotel already had holes in them. I should have thought about it. But he definitely did. But if you read it, his spin on it is really interesting. But
yeah, it's I like, and I've had people that are very much in the kind of, they go too far one way. They're very much what we would call, I guess, the just cause or whatever. And they like flat out hate Gordon's memoirs. They say like, don't read it. Like it's full of lies. And it's like, whoa, careful there. Because guess what? Grant was not 100% honest in his memoirs either. Shiloh, Missionary Ridge, that like there's some of it that's very much not true.
Well, I mean, of course it isn't.
Exactly.
I mean, you want to. I mean, you could take any big battle and you can look at any specific part of it. And again, we mentioned Dan Sickles a little while ago. And he talks about his post-war memoirs, the stuff he writes. He's a great read, by the way. If you read Sickles,
Sickles is such a good writer.
But he talks about how he moved his line up Third Corps, right, the Peach Orchard, Trossel Barn, that whole deal.
Yeah.
But he says in his memoirs he knew Longstreet was coming. which there's no way in hell he could have known he was coming. If he knew Longstreet was coming, then it makes sense for him to do that. But there's no way in the world, unless he had Miss Cleo with him, right? There's no way in the world he could possibly know Longstreet was coming, right? But he says that's what he did. And then after the war, Longstreet goes, "Oh yeah, he knew, who knew? High five, you know." But that's how it goes. So that's why these stories come out. But it's fun. It's fun to study this stuff because
Some of these guys were getting together and talking about
you
what they
get
were
you
gonna
get to
write.
you get to make you get to make your own judgments. You get to read your own thing. But again, if you keep your mind open to change, it's much better. It's when you sit there and say, nope, nope, this is the way it is.
Yeah, you have to be willing. Like, I mean, I've changed my opinion on a lot of guys that are part of the Civil War. I used to not have a great opinion of Howard, and then I started looking at him more, and obviously he's my favorite one to study. Is he the best general ever? No, and I don't think that. He made mistakes. He's a human, but he's an interesting study. Oh, good afternoon from Germany, water killer. Cool.
Oh, hey, what's going on? But again, that's part of the whole cult of personality thing.
Yeah.
There's it's like wrestling. It's that there's the good people and then there's the heels.
Yeah.
And just like in wrestling, sometimes I remember The Rock, he was a bad guy. They became a good guy. He went back and forth.
Yeah.
And so you have to you can like a guy and hate a guy and like a guy and hate a guy. You can go back and forth. But there are some people who are very polarizing, guys like Dan Sickles, we just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Specifically. Longstreet is very polarizing. And a lot of that, we had Dr. Varon on talk about her book. It's very obvious why he was polarizing, which is post-war stuff. And people want to talk about the Lee Longstreet Gettysburg thing, like it happened in real time. That stuff didn't happen until after the war, all the bickering about that. There are books now that kind of spin that in another way, which it is what it is, I guess. But the politics part of it, him becoming a Republican, him going to New Orleans and hiring, black soldiers to be on his staff.
Yeah.
The Canal Street fight, 1867 there, when he's having black Confederates, black soldiers fighting against Confederates in the street. I mean, it was going to be, that was a big part of this. And you see a lot of it with when you need to pin the fault on Gettysburg on and it's Lee's fault, pin on somebody else. He's an easy target after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And guys like John Marshall, Walter Taylor, they don't help. They jump on the Lee train and they throw Stewart under the bus too.
Yeah. And then there's Mosby, who's trying to say, "Oh, was it that way?"
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because Mosby had a huge crush on Jeb.
Oh, Mosby, will you kid me? He had Teen Beat magazines with Jeb all around his bedroom. Trust me. Centerfolds,
I'm just picturing that.
The ostrich feather edition.
What? The ostrich feather edition. Oh Never mind. I know it's in his hat.
Anyway, but that's the thing. And so when all these stories came out, it's easy, and then people jump on their camps. Guys like Bob Crick, these historians, Harry Fonz, a lot of them. Douglas Southall Freeman, obviously, and depending who you read, tends to be where your mind is set. Yeah. But they all have very different agendas. The Lee Longstreet thing is a fascinating study. But if truth be told, if for the Gettysburg people, if you really want someone to blame for Gettysburg on the Confederate side, it's Samuel R. Johnson. He's probably the guy, because he's the scout who went out and reconnoitered the area, and everything kind of went from there. But if you read his story, it's a good one too. But there's so much that went wrong for the Confederates at Gettysburg. It's so much that went wrong. Yeah. There's a million. You could blame one of a million different people, but it just seemed like it was not to blame Lee.
Yes. Well, it makes sense the way he's, and that especially comes about after his death. Durant's got a question. He said he doesn't know much about Mosby. Was he like Quantrill and
No, not at all.
We did an episode on Mosby about a year and a bit ago.
A guy like a Bloody Bill Anderson in Missouri, he was a guerrilla. He was a mercenary guy where he was so bad the Confederacy said he's not with us. He's Bloody Bill was a guy. Same with Quantrill and his Raiders, but mostly Bloody Bill. He was a guy who would wait outside of train stations for Union soldiers to arrive coming home from leave.
Yeah.
and kidnap them and shoot them in the back of the head in front of their families. That's who Bloody Bill Anderson was. Mosby was not like that. He was almost like a better version of John Hunt Morgan, where
Yeah.
Mosby would cause problems and he would just cause issues, but he wasn't a stone cold murderer like he was. Anderson was a bad friggin' dude.
Yeah.
Mosby was somebody who was trying to do what he was doing in Northern Virginia to keep the focus there and just cause issues. But yeah, that's not a good comparison. I think Bloody Bill Anderson is probably 3 notches above Nathan Bedford Forrest in the psycho killer scale.
Yeah, but Anderson or like Duane Mosby is a great study.
Anderson was a murderer who used the war as a reason to kill.
Yeah.
He would have been a murderer if there was no Civil War. That's who he was. And he paid for it. They gunned him down, but Mosby is a great study and a fascinating Civil War character. He just is. He's a guy who after the war helped with U.S. Grant's campaign.
Yeah.
He was someone who went the other way and helping the country together. Rumors is he's the one who originally taught Patton from the World War II how to ride a horse because he was friends with his grandfather. So there's a lot of different stories with him, but no, that would be a real disservice to put Mosby in that with that group.
Yeah, well, he didn't. Duran said he hasn't studied him much, so he's just wondering from like if he was
if you haven't studied Mosby, definitely study Mosby because he's so cool. He is. I mean, if he just is. He's just a fascinating guy. And if you go to Fairfax and you go to visit a lot of the places where Mosby was and a lot of things he did, he basically had an undercover group of men. They didn't stay in camps. They stayed in houses. And at night, they would all get together and cause issues and then come back. And they called him the Gray Ghost because no one knew who he was. He was kind of like Batman.
Yeah. And he was like, he started to really like, remember the dog?
Oh yeah. There's a story where he's riding down the road one day on his horse and he hears some man yelling, Mosby, come here, Mosby. And he's like, what the hell? So he rides up and he's like, yeah. He's like, who are you? He goes, John Mosby. He goes, no, I was yelling for my dog Mosby. I named after the great Cavalier John Mosby. You're Mosby? He's like, yeah. So that's who he was. There's a lot of cool stories.
I like the spanking story.
Oh, the Stoughton story is great. And he writes on the chalkboard, all that stuff.
I love that where he writes about he takes the charcoal from the fireplace and just writes Mosby on the wall after he spanks Stoughton's in bed and Mosby spanks him.
Yeah, Stoughton's there and he walks up and wakes up General Stoughton and says, that's why Mosby goes. Stoughton's half asleep and he goes, oh, did we finally catch Mosby? And he goes, no, sir, I just caught you. Get out of bed. And slaps him in the ass with a sword.
Yeah, and he would let them go afterwards. It was just like
he wasn't a cold-blooded murderer like Anderson was. But that was different though because Mosby was part of the cavalry versus Anderson was part of a self-employed militia who just did shit on behalf of the Confederacy. And he mostly who was part of Anderson's gang was Jesse James.
Yeah.
And Jesse James was no picnic either, Mary. He was unfortunately the Brady Bunch got that one wrong.
Frank's wondering what is the best Mosby biography.
I mean, I like his memoirs personally. I mean, who John Gentili's on here. He'd probably type in a good book, but I think his memoirs is great because he talks about his story. He talks about the good and the bad. He debunks the Jeb Stuart of Gettysburg stuff pretty handily. But there's books I can't think of on the top of my head, but we have some here. But I always go back to his diary, which is somewhere in here. Here it is. Yeah, it's right here. Right here, John Singleton Mosby, the memoirs of Colonel John Mosby. This is the one to buy. This is the one. Yeah,
Miranda said it's good too.
Yeah, and she's a big Jeb fan. Talking well about Mosby, it must be good. From Miranda,
she likes Mosby. AQ mentioned she's been listening to Meade at Gettysburg on Audible. Meade put a lot of blame on Sickles for day 2. It seems.
No, he does. I mean, Meade at Gettysburg. I mean, you have to understand Kent Masterson Brown, good friend of the podcast, right? He's very, very much on Team Meade.
Yeah.
and he doesn't like Dan Sickles. And it was funny when we were talking to Hesser that time that he was talking about how they go back and forth, but yeah, I mean, Mead is interesting because if you read Kent, he talks about, and he's fair, but he's very much on pro Mead, and Gelzo is the opposite. And people, it's interesting though, because when if you read Gelzo's book on Gettysburg, he's very harsh on Mead.
Yep.
Right. But the problem is that he's not wrong. He just talks about the things
that make people
don't,
uncomfortable about
and that's fun. And that's like, I like Mead. I do. Okay. But there is some truth to the fact that he was writing letters even after Gettysburg saying this war should not continue in this way. We should just sue for peace and call it a day. This is ridiculous. And those letters are in Gelzo's book we just talked about too. So he's not wrong, but again, that there are two sides to this.
Yeah.
And Mead politically was a complete 180 opposite to Lincoln. Complete opposite.
Oh, yeah.
But he didn't get along with the Sickles of the world because he was more straight and narrow, and Sickles was kind of a wild man, right?
Yeah.
Blame Sickles put all the wagons there when the Third Corps was moving up from Maryland. The Second Corps was coming up from like Union Bridge, from Tawnytown and stuff like that. Sickles was clogging the roads.
Yeah.
So he was having all kinds of issues with him personally. But yeah, but these personal issues are interesting. And you see how the authors gravitate to one side or the other. Most of them are pretty balanced. Kent's book is very balanced. But some of the fanboy stuff, like the Stephen Sears stuff or the Southall Freeman stuff, is so far to one side, you really have to find an opposite book and find the middle ground.
Yeah, I still like, I recommend Sears, even though I'm not a huge fan of his writing. I do recommend it because it is still good. It's still like, I read it, but I don't agree with him on McClellan and I don't agree with him on Howard. I think he, like, the Howard stuff is like really like, it's like, wow, did Howard, like, are you just going to blame him for the extinction of the dinosaurs too? Because that's like, he just rips him hard over Gettysburg. And even Chancellorsville as well. But I still recommend those books to people because they are worth reading. They're worth checking out because they're part of the history of it. I also like the one I recommend the most for people getting into Gettysburg is Trudeau's, because it's a great overview of the battle. And Trudeau is really good about using the soldiers, their diaries and stuff to tell the story. He does that with Southern Storm as well, which is about Sherman's March to the Sea. And that's a fun book because it talks about the weather. He's able to give a weather report on each day as to what the temperature was, because so many of the soldiers talked about the weather in it.
I've got a book somewhere in here about the Battle of Gettysburg was just on the weather. That's some professor at Pennsylvania College wrote.
There was Jim and Eric on Battle of Gettysburg podcast did a good book or a good episode about that, and it was really good.
It's interesting though,
Question, was the Lee at Gettysburg the same Lee at Malvern Hill?
Well, it's different. I mean, Malvern Hill, Malvern Hill's kind of the black mark on the 7 Days campaign. Union Bay was not a good day for Lee. But there's unfortunately there was a lot that went into that. You know who had a real bad day at Malvern Hill was Armistead, right? Where he's hiding behind the tree. He got the nickname Poplar General because he hid behind a poplar tree. But again, you're talking about a situation where you're going up against McClellan loads that hill full of artillery, right?
Yeah.
And you're going up that. Just picture like Cheatham Hill, Kennesaw, right?
Yeah.
Where the top is all artillery. They're going up against the artillery. You're not going to make it with that. You're not going to. So it was. That's more of a pro McClellan thing than a bad Lee thing.
Yeah.
But people talk about it because everything was going good. Everything, except for Stonewall. Shitty day at 7 days. The whole campaign, he sucked, right? But that's I think the Meade at Gettysburg was different because he was somebody who I think had a lot more confidence at that point.
Mean Lee?
I mean Lee at Gettysburg, a lot more confident at Gettysburg, and I think a lot of things went wrong on both things. But I think Gettysburg, he had a little more time to digest what was going on. And despite what the movie says, he did have cavalry. He just didn't have Stuart until the second, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
but the Armistead story of Malvern Hill is a good one, though. That's a fun one because who gave him a lot of shit about that was Hancock.
Oh, really?
About that, he might have been the one who called him Poplar General. Actually, he might have been. I could be wrong, but he might have been the one who gave him that nickname. Actually, but yeah, it's fun. It's fun studying these little battles like this.
Yeah.
Armor said this grumpy prick, miserable all the time, and
Yeah. He's not the way he was in the movie.
it's pretty funny, you know.
No, there was like you brought up Kennesaw Mountain. That's one that we saw a year ago. We went there. And for anybody who's like you're in the Atlanta area, you have to go to Kennesaw and you have to go to Pickett's Mill. Kennesaw is one of those ones where when you see it, you're like, why? Why did this even happen?
Yeah, no, there's Kennesaw's a tough one though, because we mentioned Sherman a while ago. Was Sherman, despite his reputation, which is not a very good game day manager, a good
No.
fighter, he was great at strategy, great at maps, great at
Yep.
terrain, the whole deal. But the problem with him is he he always wanted to bob and weave and move Johnson back. He wanted to hit the flank, but when he had to fight straight on, he wasn't very good. Kennesaw, I think, was his probably. I mean, people talk about Chickasaw a lot, but I think Kennesaw was his worst moment.
Oh,
Now
yes.
he went up against some good people, guys like Cheatham, guys like
Yep.
that. But the problem is that you've walked the train. No one the hell's going to win that. It's
No.
impossible. It's a great visit, but it goes to show, like, Sherman was somebody. We saw it again. What happened with Pickett's Mill, right?
Yep.
He's going to attack that flank again. But what happens is Johnson defends that right flank because he knows now that Sherman won't attack me frontally. He will not frontally expose himself, right? What he'll do is he's going to hit my flanks. I'm going to put friggin' my
Clayburn.
iron. I'm going to put Clayburn on my right at Pickett's Mill. I'm going to send poor Howard to go bumble through the friggin' woods to go fight him. And then what's going to happen? They're going to run, and then Howard's going to get his ass kicked.
Oh yeah, and then Howard sends that report where he's like, "I think," at the end of it, meaning he doesn't know.
Oh yeah.
Is it like they're in front of me? I think.
Oh, MJ, before she jumps off, we got to talk about this thing we're doing with her. Okay.
Yeah.
I just don't know she's jumping off. So 2 weeks from yesterday, Friday, the Friday before Memorial Day. I'm not doing dates. We'll be doing a thing with her at the Good Samaritan Lodge 336 in Gettysburg, where each of us are going to portray a character in first person.
Yeah.
She's going to portray Pauline Cushman, or Howard, one of the two. I think she's not sure what she's going to do, but I'm pretty sure it'll be Cushman. I'm going to do Edward Cross, and you're going to do Elizabeth Thorne. And it's a $50 donation to the Gettysburg Foundation. It's going to include dinner, and you get to pick a Northern dinner or a Confederate dinner, and it's going to be in the lodge. And we're going to do presentations about 15, 20 minutes each in first person of these characters. All proceeds benefit the Gettysburg Foundation. So if you're in town in Gettysburg on that Friday before Memorial Day, try to come by. You get to see MJ, you get to see our two smiling faces. And it's going to be a good time, and it's for a good cause, and it'll be a lot of fun. So if you're in the area, definitely come check.
We
check us all
promoted
out.
it on our Facebook page, so the details are all on there. But yeah, it'll be a good time. And then on Saturday night, we are doing an event with Getty's Gear, obviously in Gettysburg. We're going to be doing cigars, bourbon, beer from 7 to 9 over at Getty's Gear. Just a little
and that's a free event, obviously, and you can buy cigars and buy drinks there. But Carrie Gregory, who runs Getty's Gear over there across by Jenny Wade House, we're going to be doing an event there, and just come by. It's just going to be a hangout, shoot the shit, hang out with us, nerd out. So hopefully you can come to that. Hopefully there'll be a lot of people there and check that stuff out. So the Memorial Day weekend in Gettysburg is always a good time, but we have a lot of cool stuff going. So hopefully you can get there. Hopefully you can, especially the Masonic events. I think that's going to be great. And our event with Carrie. If you need cigars, okay, or a lot of different things, go to Getty's Gear, because I'll tell you point blank, you will not find a better cigar than a Getty's Gear. And they're great people. We can't say enough about them. You get our stickers there too, Mary. You get stickers.
Yes, and we have more stickers to bring them too. Bjorn's on here from Abraham Lincoln Bookshop. We caught his live the other day.
We had a lot of fun watching that.
That was a great live. I love listening to
old Timmy. And he's he obviously we were talking about Tim a little while ago about how he's kind of the guru for all things, Vicksburg especially.
Yep.
But he's a good dude. He's kind of like the new Shelby Foote with the whole voice and the attitude. We had some fun. We had some questions we asked him. It made him laugh a few times. So it was pretty good.
We appreciate the shout out to Bjorn.
Absolutely.
On there. So he mentions that Dave Powell's multi-volume Atlanta campaign set is due this summer. So that'll be something. Dave Powell's a great author. He wrote a multi-volume books on Chickamauga, which is really good. We got them
right up here too. Yeah. Remember you had like two versions and I had the one you didn't have. Remember
Yes,
that?
because I couldn't get it. And I
You
remember
couldn't
like
get it.
I messaged Dave Powell on Facebook to say, is this how to print? And he's like, it's tough to get right now. I'm like, oh,
I got that in my Civil War Roundtable.
yeah.
Is one of my in a book grab. It was like $5.
Oh, another question. What it's a what if, but if Hardy had replaced Johnston instead of Hood, would Claiborne have finally gotten his corps command?
Well, we've it's funny we did a whole episode on Claiborne recently, which we did, right? Yeah, we
Yep.
did. And the problem with Claiborne was, I think pound for pound, Claiborne was the best they had on the Confederate side,
Yeah.
better than Jackson, better
Oh, I
any of them.
agree. Yeah.
But the problem with him was two things: Irish, we talked about,
Yeah.
but when he did his "we need to arm the slaves" thing,
Shot Pouch
and,
Walker was not
and
having any of it.
that really blackballed him in a lot of people. Some people agree, some people disagree, but he at the Battle of Richmond in Kentucky, he was put in corps command for the day. It was kind of like step up night, right?
Yeah.
They allowed him to do it, and he did very, very well. He'll get shot in the face though, but he did
Yeah.
he did pretty well. So he had experience. He There was so many opportunities for corps command after that Emancipation Proclamation. He was coming off of Ringgold Gap. He was red hot. He was the hot name in town. He got turned down for every corps command promotion since that. So it's hard to imagine that his arming the slaves, his Emancipation Proclamation in the South,
Yeah.
did not blackball him. Now, we've talked a lot about replacing Johnson with Hood, and that was a bad idea, Gene Skit, by doing that, because he was the wrong guy, wrong time, John Bell Hood. He was. Where Hardy would have been the guy, or
Yep.
Beauregard would have been the guy. But it's a real disservice for Claiborne not to get corps commands, and I think it's because, like we said before, Edward Cross a while ago, he got blackballed for being brigadier. I think he was blackballed, and that really was a tough spot for the Confederates, because he would have been really, really good. He should have been, but he was never going to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like sometimes I wonder maybe Hardy might have had a little bit more influence on that because they were best friends, but who knows? And like he is the best guy the Confederates have. I completely agree with that he's so good at whatever he does. And now people who don't like him will say like, well, Hood wasn't good at commanding an army, so can you say Claiborne would have been good?
Well, it's a great what if, because he gets killed at Franklin, so you'll never know. But I mean, John Bell Hood, Gettysburg John Bell Hood, especially Chickamauga John Bell Hood, fantastic. He just was. He was great at the corps command and down. I think him getting wounded at Gettysburg and taken back to the plank farm and getting his arm, taking the dead arm thing, really, really, really hurt the Confederacy at Gettysburg, because now you put Evander Law in his Alabama. He doesn't even know he's in charge. He's sitting up at Big Round Top whittling, doesn't even know what the hell's going on. And so it really screwed up that Longstreet echelon attack. Hood was really, really good, but he was the wrong guy at the wrong time. And I know there are people who worship at the altar of John Bell Hood, and I get that. But you have to open the door in your mind to the point that his game plan from Atlanta on just didn't make sense. No. I don't blame him specifically, for a lot of the stuff that went down on the Franklin campaign. But I don't blame him for getting the generals killed at Franklin either, because he's doing his job.
Yeah.
But again, Schofield was a big part of the Union success on that campaign. But you wonder what would have happened if Hardy takes over, promotes Claiborne, to corps command. How that might have changed the mindset. Do they go chase Sherman through Georgia?
I think Hart. Yeah.
Because again, you have an opportunity. Because again, Sherman's going to his march to the sea.
Yeah.
Hood's is going to go the other way. In his mind, we're going to go get to Nashville before Schofield connects with Thomas to take that town back.
Yeah.
Their supply hub, right? What happens? Does Hardy go after Sherman? We don't know. You'll never know. But again, Jeff Davis is calling the shots with this whole thing. I think it's
Bragg at that point is his like war advisor.
I just think it was a huge, and again, we'll never know the truth of what the real plan was or how it would have played out. I just think it was a huge missed opportunity for the Confederates at that point, for the Army of Tennessee, because I think they would chasing a dog up a tree,
Yeah.
where they should have been going a different. But again, we have 160 years, 2020 hindsight as our benefactor here to
Yeah.
know what happened, knowing that Georgia was defended by older men and young boys, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a Nickelodeon show, but that's kind of what it was. Whereas he ends up going the other way to fight a much stronger army at Spring Hill,
Yeah.
and then getting pants at Spring Hill, which I don't think was totally Hood's fault. I think a lot of it was a credit to Schofield.
Yeah.
But going to Nashville after Franklin, fighting in the snow against Thomas, I think at that point it's like a car driving up the road with parts falling
It's
off.
like the car in planes, trains,
right?
and automobiles.
Yeah, where I think, but again, where history would say if you went and you hit rear guard action on on Sherman, it might have been different to deny him connecting from Grant and getting like he was going to do. But again, they didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
But that's the reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jordan says Johnston saw Hood as his right hand and he was going behind his back to Bragg and Davis. That's very true.
Yeah. I mean, he was an opportunist, but again, Hood was good though. I mean, it's easy to pig pile on a guy like John Bell Hood, but because you think of Franklin, you think of Spring Hill, you think of Nashville.
But he's still good at Gettysburg and Chickamauga. Like he's good in those lower commands. It's just
he got wounded pretty quickly at the Bushman farm at Gettysburg. I mean, he was like, it was like Reynolds. I mean, he was there, he was there and he was gone. But it did screw up that whole echelon attack, because what happens, right? Now you've got Law going up chasing Berdan sharpshooters to Big Round Top, falling away. So now instead of attacking Little Round Top, now you get these guys going for Devil's Den, these guys going around the backside. It creates that gap. It leads to the battle that we feel all that stuff comes. And it's you lose your one of your stronger division guys right at the beginning, and everything falls apart at that point. That whole second day at Gettysburg for the Confederates was a disaster. One thing led to another, and they just kept compounding with mistakes they made all around.
Yeah, they did. And we got to jump off soon too. I was just about the time because we are going to John Adams' house.
Yeah. Up the street here is the John Adams house. Mary's never been before. I was taken there on many a elementary school field trip my day, but we're going to go up there and check that stuff out. So what's on the horizon for us, Mary, before we jump off?
So this week on the Friday the 17th or early Saturday morning, our episode with Dr. Alan Guelzo will drop, where we talked about his book that's coming out on a week from Monday called Voices from Gettysburg. It'll be here on our YouTube channel as well as wherever you get your podcast from. And then after that, we will be having Dave Taylor on to talk about Manhunt, which was the recent show about the Lincoln assassination and the hunt for John Wilkes Booth that was on Apple TV. That has been very polarizing in the history field, I will say.
Yeah, no question.
Dave Taylor is he is probably the expert on the Lincoln assassination and John Wilkes Booth. Great guy. We had him on before for episode 50.
Now Dave's up there with Michael Kaufman as far as the top people. We have a lot of people who are big into the assassination. Dr. Case is great.
Yeah.
Dr. Alfred's really, really good. There's a bunch of them, but no, we're going to have him on. We're going to do kind of a dissection and analysis of the TV show Manhunt. We're going to talk about that from soup to nuts, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good things that they did, primarily Andrew Johnson. The bad things they did, primarily guys like Samuel Cox,
or apparently Stanton's lack of beard,
the over embellishment of Edward Stanton, the lack of respect for Thomas Eckhart and stuff like that. But that'll be good. That'll be fun to have him on. But we're going to drop the Guelzo episode this week, and that was a fun one to record. We did that about a week or so ago with him. Fascinating guy, fun conversation. You guys will enjoy that. It goes about an hour and a half, so it's a long one. But I think for the Gettysburg people, it's a fascinating study.
Yeah, and even just general in the Civil War, just how you can put together a book of primary sources and tell the story of a battle and look at different perspectives like he does.
Yeah.
And then our episode after Dave Taylor will be Lew Wallace.
Yeah, we're going to do Lew Wallace. We're going to talk about him. So the people who don't like Billy the Kid, are going to have to cover your ears on this one, because that whole thing. But we'll talk about that because he's the man who saved Washington, Mary.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Man who saved
Although
Washington.
I've got my personal issues with old Lou Wallace for what he did to my poor Mary Surratt.
Yeah, I'm not into that part of him. He
Speaking
definitely
of Lincoln
was.
assassination.
Yeah. Yeah. Good, bad, and ugly though. That's what we
Anyway,
talk about.
so before we jump off, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all the people out there, all the mothers, and for all you mothers, have a good day as well. If you're a Boston person, you know what that is.
Yeah.
So definitely enjoy your day. Treat your moms well, and then go from there. So, all right, let's jump off. We got things to do, Mary. We got things to see. We have beers to drink today. We have a good day. So we'll have
just
a great
before we
rest of
jump
the day.
off, Lou Wallace did write Ben-Hur.
He did write Ben-Hur. And if you watch the movie closely, you can see during the chariot scene a guy wearing a modern three-piece suit and a guy with a wristwatch.
Yep.
So there you go.
And the chariot scene was based off of a racehorse that he had with Grant, that Lou Wallace won.
He's a fascinating guy. He really, really is. And you're reading the book on Lou Wallace.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's a good, I haven't read that one yet. So I'm looking forward to that. All right. So why don't we jump off? Everyone have a great weekend. So hopefully you people have a good rest of the weekend. It's Saturday. Hopefully it's warm. It's warming up. It's kind of chilly here, but
where we are.
But try to do the best. But check out the episode with Dr. Gelzo. It's a great listen, I promise. Buy the book, Voices from Gettysburg. It's right here. We'll talk about it. And if you are, we'll be doing this before we go to Pennsylvania. But if you go to Gettysburg that weekend, Memorial Day, hit us up. We'd love to hang out. We have the Masonic thing, but if you don't want to spend the money for that, that's cool. Come check out the Gettys Gear events. We're gonna have where there'll be, you can buy cigars, bourbon, hang out. Just to hang out. So always fun to hang with people of like-minded stuff. So off we go, Mary. Once again, the pleasure was all yours. We will talk to everyone, as we say all the time, on the other side.
See you guys later.
Peace out, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.